Okay, hello everybody. So we've got a talk now from Amiga, and they're going to be first doing a couple of presentations, and then it's really a session to ask questions and do a big Q&A afterwards. So get your questions ready and anything you wanted to ask. Here's the guys from Amiga. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is a bit of a continuation of the chat we had at the RedCon event 6 weeks ago. At the time, these two agreements we're going to mention today had not been concluded yet, and this makes a huge difference in clarity in the questions you can ask and in the questions we can answer. So first, for a refresh on a bit of a surprise topic maybe, which has been waiting for 6 or 7 years now, because we have been brainstorming about this topic since the original Amiga acquisition in 2019. Paul is going to present something about the Amiga logo. So, Paul.
That's it. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Paul, and I live in Poland, of course, so Paul from Poland. And I'm, of course, a big fan of Amiga. And together with Thomas and with Mike and Thomas, who is a lead designer behind the new Amiga logo project, and of course our brainstorming team, our friends of Amiga, we created a refreshed visual identity for our favorite brand. Unfortunately, Thomas, who is the main designer behind the logo, couldn't be here today, but I had the pleasure of leading the project, so I will walk you through all the details. As Mike said, about five, maybe 6 years ago, we approached Mike with a Amiga hardware project with Thomas, but because of the legal situation, it was put on hold. But during this conversation, we proposed a few new Amiga logos. But again, because of the legal situation, it was put on hold again. And 3 months ago, Mike reached out and said that the time was right to come back to this project. Yeah, and me and Thomas, we run digital agencies, and web agencies, so it was a natural fit for us. And to be honest, a great honor to work on the Amiga logo. Yeah. So the new Amiga logo isn't a revolution. Yeah, it's a evolution. I think it's a careful, respectful evolution of something we all love. So I hope you will like it. But before getting to our work, a brief look at the history, which I'm sure everyone in this room knows well. Yeah. So Amiga logo has gone through a number of iterations, reflecting in every shift in technology, in corporate ownership, ambition of different people, and so on. So we had a 1982 early Amiga logo, this hand-drawn red line version. We have, of course, iconic 1985 logo presented with Amiga 1000. We have this weird, for me, late 80s logo, which was probably used by the mainly by the US division of the Amiga. And we have, of course, the red square dot version and the Boeing ball version from 1996. And of course, some of these variants work better than others. But during our design process, we had to make a decision on our direction. And in our opinion, the 1985 version is the most recognizable and resonant symbol of our favorite platform. So it expressed what machine was, so a multimedia revolution, for me, a combination of raw, computational power with a human creativity. So this logo was a foundation for further refinements. And we started with the wordmark. The wordmark, the original wordmark is a slightly modified Garamond bold italic font, yeah? But Garamond italic font is a font with a long history, very elegant, but it has its issues and flaws by today's standard. And most issues are related to inconsistencies. So let's take a closer look at the original wordmark. So it has, as far as I remember, about 6 different angles, a significant number of stroke weights, inconsistent spacing, non-uniform serifs. So a lot of small things that are not unified. And of course the rest of wordmark has the same inconsistencies. So what we did was carefully redraw the wordmark from scratch, creating a more refined and consistent mark, but preserving the original look and feel. In the background you can see the original wordmark as a shadow for a comparison. So it's closed, but it's very refined. And if we take a closer look, you can see all these fixes in detail. So we applied just few simple rules. So now we have only 3 angles, just 2 weights of the strokes, like thin and thick. The serifs are built from the same circular form. We straightened the wobbly serif, so the logo now looks cleaner with modern look, and the letters align perfectly precisely at the top and at the bottom. And the same logic was, of course, applied throughout the rest of the wordmark. And of course, the next big thing is a rainbow checkmark. It always was an iconic symbol of the logo, but again with lot of issues like inconsistent angles, like you can see very unnatural shadows, and like a visual disconnect from the wordmark, from the design point of view. But for me, the biggest issue is that it has appeared in so many variants over the internet. Yeah, so different shapes, different color of the gradients, different proportions, with no consistent version adopted by the community. So here you can see just 4 variants of this checkmark, but believe me, there are hundreds of them over the internet. But before designing or creating the new checkmark, first we defined 7 core colors for the Amiga. They are very close to the original, but they are refined for today's standards. Yeah, so they are especially more vivid. We also defined two additional colors, like dark and light for backgrounds, for typography, and so on. Of course, these colors are very well defined with hex values and so on. So you can reuse them very, very easily. And we applied all these 7 colors and created a new Amiga gradient. Yeah. And using this gradient, based on the gradient colors, we defined a new checkmark with rounded forms, the same 32 angle, angle matching the wordmark, modern color palette. So the same DNA as 1985 logo, but rebuilt for today standards and for the future. We also refined some small details, so maybe let's take a closer look at them. The original checkmark had a very sharp bend at the bottom, so we rounded it slightly and added a subtle shadow at the bend, dropped by the longer stripe onto the shorter ones, and the whole result feels softer and smoother now, and to be honest, more refined. And we applied the same logic for the tips of the stripes, so the corners, so rounded them slightly. These are small details, but the logo feels like now like a one unified design, not two elements. I mean, the check mark and the word mark placed side by side. So these rounded elements match the rounded serif of the word mark. So we have now one consistent unified design throughout the entire logo. Yeah. And here it is, the Amiga logo on the light background. So this is the primary version, the one you will probably see most often. I believe it's clean, recognizable, and it honors over 40 years of history, but setting a clear standard for today and for the future. Thank you. And one more version, the version on the dark background, when the rainbow gradient really comes alive. It's my favorite one. So the logo reflects the full energy, what Amiga has always, represented, like creativity, fun, technical strength, and something that for me feels ahead of its time. So I hope that you will love the new refreshed logo as much as we do. And thank you. Thank you, and I would like to say that we are working on more visual things around the Amiga. So we are extending the visual, the brand book. Yeah, at the moment, probably we'll create some, logo reveal animation in few months. There is a website, Mike, waiting for, so amiga.com, waiting for building. It's not just visual thing, but very main part of the Amiga. So yeah, more things to come in the future. It's just the beginning. Yeah, and some context to me, Thomas, who was the main designer, and of course Mike.
Thank you, Paul. So interestingly, this is about perfection in detail, about obsession, quality. When we released the announcement about the recent agreements that were entered in, a few days ago, at the bottom, there was the new logo. Nobody noticed. And this is what we wanted, not a radical change, but clarity, for everyone to be able to use the same standards. What colors, how should it be magnified, how will it be small, also in pixels. We're working with pixel artists to see how it can look maybe in the Amiga OS boot screen, Amiga OS 3 and so on. Now we are going to talk a little bit about the reason why we were able to make these announcements and set a new course and at last remove some of the possible futures and focus on a few ones. And how we got here. Ravi yesterday found this picture and we said, let's use it today. That's me with the green hair. When I had hair, and I was dressed as Amiga Syndrome at an Amiga DevCon with J Mine, of course, and the gentleman is from Commodore France. That's a long way. And actually, there's a story that came up. I never told this, never, not even at an Amiga event. I was 11 or 12. Commodore Italy was pitching the VIC-20 for the educational market. And they thought, for some reason, because I was active with the local reseller for the Northeast, they thought that me as a young boy was a good example to show to schools how, somebody could sit on a table and program. Well, that was like 15 years before. But I was, maybe I was 19, 20, I don't know what it was here, but so I was always dressing up like in church to be taken seriously, because I always was like, I felt like the youngest. And then in the US they said, oh no, he's dressing like that because he's European. No. So I was doing this, I was sitting on a table programming some music in BASIC, and every now and then the people from the school organization were looking and so on. And then we went to Commodore Italy and they put me on a chair. I remember there was this golden, I don't know if it was a golden C64, I think it was a golden VIC-20 or something. It was like a presidential office. And there was somebody from Commodore US visiting that day. And I was there like playing, and this gentleman comes in, goes out, shouts, "What's the boy doing on my chair?" A secretary comes in. So I don't know, was it whoever, Jack Trammell, maybe. I then met Jack Trammell and his sons at some events when he was already at Atari, but yeah, I like to believe it was some big fish from Commodore US. So I started early, a bit too early, and I still don't know. I'm still touching Amiga floppy disk labels today, but that's what I'm doing. So as I was mentioning, this is a bit of a continuation of the talk we had at DriveCon, where we were missing the clarity on these two crucial elements with Commodore, the new entity who bought these trademarks, and with Hyperion, where after many years at last we concluded, we reached a settlement, and this almost total clarity. I say almost because I know there are some questions. And the acquisition, as you know, into the current Amiga entity was completed in 2019, but we inherited this legal case which needed to be resolved in order to be here and be able to do this. Also the logo. You saw a 10-15 minutes presentation of this work, but you didn't see the long labor of the discarded logos, the two radical changes, the other agencies and the creative people who made proposals, and our agonizing talks with the retail partners and with former Commodore people and other interested parties about what other possible futures and logos. But at some point you have to make some choices. So some people, of course, are passionate about the Boing Ball, and we think still it has a strong narrative reason to continue to exist, like Mitchie the Dog, like Robo City, and like other elements of the Amiga history. So this will be the corporate logo, and you will see it used more and more and with more consistency over time. So you've seen me in some AI-generated pictures. I don't own a white shirt like some posted. The gentleman from Commodore came to visit us in May. So you have Alex, John, and Perry, together with, from our team, Massimo, Carlo, and Gianluca. I was taking the picture here. And we had some talks about possible futures. The possible futures are still open in part, but we reached an important agreement. This agreement too took a few months to conclude. Of course, we confirmed the licensing because Amiga, as you probably know, thanks to the work also of Quanto, but Amiga owns the copyrights also for the 8 bits. So we had to clarify all these aspects of mutual recognition and licensing. So almost in closing a circle, Amiga, which was purchased by Commodore in '84, now owns most of the assets in terms of copyrights plus the Amiga logo, but not, of course, the chicken lips and the Commodore mark. But also in the agreement, Amiga is allowed to continue to use those marks in historical materials. So I'm in touch with Dave McMurtry, who you know probably well from the Historical Society, preserving all these Commodore documents. They have a Facebook group. And he said, this is the best news we've heard since 1994, because at last we know who can preserve and what we can do. Otherwise, what do you have to do? Remove the logos, or who's in charge of what? So we reached clarity on these elements, and it's been a team building experience. I like Starfleet. They say we come in peace, no? And then they have all the, but this is the agreement we did. So, and it was a nice team building experience. We will meet again at Gamescom and other events. We are in frequent touch. I like them. They're a nice team, and they met some of our team, and it's been a positive and constructive relationship so far. And here, of course, we have Timothy. Right after that, I went to Belgium because we had to we had a deadline, a court deadline, a self-imposed deadline by June 30. We stretched it a little bit, but so we entered into that agreement as well. And we defined the roles and confirmed everything about Amiga OS 4, Amiga OS 3, the timeline, leaving some elasticity. Not ambiguity, I would say, some elasticity in how the transition should best be done for the handover of Amiga OS 3 from Hyperion management to Amiga management, hopefully with many of the same developers, but also many new ones. So nothing changes for OS4, of course. Everything was absolutely confirmed. There were no disputes ever about that. So if there was a lack of clarity about other CPUs, we just confirmed that any CPU is possible for Hyperion's Amiga OS 4, except for the 68K. So 68K is now defined clearly as an Amiga domain, both for the old and for the future. We started already working on some new work for Amiga OS 3. Like I have an RTG subsystem here actually. I can show it to you later downstairs, and we are unifying our development systems with different compilers and tool chains right now. So at least until the end of 2027, there will be an Amiga OS 3.2 and 3.3 by Hyperion, and at some point during this year, or next year, there will be more work, increasing work by Amiga on the 68K front. And basically, yes, this is my introduction, and I'm open to your questions. I'm sure more little details will also come up in my mind now. And yeah, on. Is it on? Yeah. So yes, what are? Yeah, sure.
So you talked about more software like this RTG sort of system.
Yeah.
What other things might you working on software-wise?
Well, there's a big debate, for example, now they talk a lot about age rating, about age verification. Should an OS have TCP/IP or not, for example? Should, for hacker reasons, even should there be a dual stack like IPv6 in addition to IPv4? I think there should be an IPv4, last but not least, because Amiga OS 3.9 had it, and there should be a replacement of all of these 3.5, 3.9, 3.1, 4, 3.2, and 3.3. And I think there should be a version which Amiga would like to offer as a free upgrade, that at last allows you to say, I'm content with this version and I don't need to get bits and pieces from the past. So at least we should wrap that part up. So reaction is another topic. In a settlement agreement, you reach elegance maybe after draft version 10. By the time we were at draft version 40, it had become a bit of a patchwork. For example, up until the end of June, there was a more elegant transition from 3.3, right from Hyperion to Amiga. And then the issue of backported code from Amiga OS 4 to Amiga OS 3 became an issue, a blocking issue. So we had to remove that. There's been some debate, how many lines of code are we talking about? Is it 800 or 1,000 lines? How much can it be worth? Why should it be blocking and so on? Or is this about something else? Now, we are going to get soon 314 build that already has some enhancement that are part of the 3.2 plus series, like file system work by Olaf Bartel, for example. So I don't know how exactly I think there's margin for, as I use the word elasticity, there's margin for future discussions about reaction, for example, as a shared component between OS 4 and OS 3. The future can be also one of very radical changes. Amiga has so many things to so many people, it can also be a completely different thing. That's not for us to decide, at least not outside of the 68K front. But maybe you can, as a next step, we could join forces with the OS 4 team and plan things even better together. So yeah, I think this is a best first step considering the past few years into the future. Yeah. Yes, sure. Yeah.
Will you be publishing your branding guide for marketing on your website?
Yeah, we should have both a branding guide and branding use guide. Yeah, so there's been a lot of confusion also on the, I don't even like the use legal side, but you know, every company gives some advice on how the spacing and the legal footnotes and these things. So yes, there will be. It's high on the list of things to do. Yes. So right now, I don't know if you saw this article from a few days ago. We have big hardware partners. So from 1200net to Unstream Arcade, who do streaming, Blaze Entertainment, you may know them from the Evercade and from the Hypermega type little products who use cartridges also with Amiga. Of course, Croanto now being a licensee, and Commodore also, and Hyperion. Retro Games do hardware and will continue to do hardware, and they do high volume hardware. So containers full of new Amiga hardware, where one thing I miss personally, and I think as a company it will be a high priority, is when you have all these products, also soon by SpecNext and others, there's a bit of a fragmentation in the operating system reference. Also in the content, you buy a game here and you're not sure whether you can use it on all of these different platforms. So it will be a high priority. Once we have a next Amiga OS 3 that meets the criteria we said before, that is able to replace the previous, not that it's necessarily needed for retro gaming. For retro gamings, you need Amiga OS 1.3 and 3.1 and maybe a few more for total compatibility, but the old games don't really rely on like reaction or other components. But still, if we also want the future, that's also an important step. And I think we should standardize how to package the titles that can be purchased or otherwise freely acquired, whatever the game developers decide. There's been such a rich, newly development content in the last years in 8-bit and Amiga, and it would be a pity to not have these hundreds of thousands of machines be usable for that content. So, and about new hardware, yes, it's on the map, but the important thing for now is that the partners are a bit more aligned on the actual ability to use Amiga OS and its content. Yes, sir.
Firstly, it's a very brave person to take on a brand as beloved as such as Commodore and get that logo in front of a room full of enthusiasts like that and fiddle with it. That's a very brave thing. I think you've done a good job of that.
Thank you. We were a bit nervous about that.
There'll always be haters, you know, in the community. There's always someone that hates it, but that's life. So firstly, yeah, great. My question is, with all the conversations you've had around the OS and the CPUs and all that kind of stuff, the utopian vision I've heard some people suggest would be great if there was a version of Amiga OS that worked on ARM natively.
Of course, ARM, RISC-V, or what else? Yes.
Has that come up in any discussions? Or?
It has, but the clarity we reached, and it was an important milestone, locks us out of non-68K for now. So this is, in my opinion, a possible future next step, talking with Hyperion, with Trevor and other parties. It's an important first step. You couldn't do the next step without the previous one. And of course, the moment we brought clarity about some issues, and some people said, why do you put all these topics in a single announcement like 4 days ago? And I said, well, we have 5 more actually. And then I mentioned some of these, and he said, no, well, why don't you mention these too? And I said, either it's too long or it's too short, or I think we have some discussions and plans, and I prefer to deliver facts to more questions, but yes, ARM or RISC-V, or something else, yes. I remember when I was a big fan of the PowerPC, and the debate was, should it be Alpha or PowerPC, or... Sorry, you were first, and then, yeah.
I've got 2 questions. Is there any potential for open sourcing some of the Amiga stuff? And the other side of it is you brought like OS3 under the Amiga banner again, and having discussions with Commodore. Is there any potential for bringing other things under the Amiga core banner?
Yes. So, sorry, the first question was... yes. I think open source, if by open source you mean a strict OSI definition, I think that could be a 3rd step. We are not getting younger. The first step would be, in my opinion, if by free you also see a relationship with open and free and more available, the free upgrades would be an important step, in my opinion, and then we may have like a dual license with, for example, even under OSI approved licenses, you have like Apache, which says, okay, but there's no trademark license implied. Or you have some dual license mechanism where you have a non-commercial. So, for example, free, open, with source available to use on your machines, sure, yeah, that's an easy next step. But then as a commercial entity, maybe you want to control the actual brand, and that's not part of that license, and you have a commercial license for the partners. So I think this could be a very feasible and likely second step. And as for complete, like an OSI approved license, that is a more theoretical 3rd step. But I see these in this order right now. And the second question was about a possible more product like under the Commodore Amiga branding.
Yeah, just under the Amiga brand itself, it's obviously brought in 34X. Is there other people you want to discuss with to bring more things that could then broadly be under the new Amiga kind of thing?
Yeah, so if by that you also mean hardware done in-house, yeah. So all of our hardware partners have so engineering got easier in a way. You can do more in smaller teams, from the testing to the manufacturing production. We have people who, they go to China on a Sunday, on Monday, the first day they are in the factory, and on Friday they already discuss the prototype refinements. And that's how you can work today. It was disrupted a bit with COVID, but now it's again fully running. And all of these teams have also some duplication of work. Blaze Entertainment, Retro Games, SpecNext, Commodore. They all replicate some of the resources, and maybe there's potential for more efficient integration there. But about in-house, what does in-house mean? It will always be maybe manufactured in China, probably. I see both partnership and direct, yes, and it should have a new Amiga OS included, but it should also have the past. I think Amiga has, as part of its identity also the ability to run the old. So Amiga OS 1.3 and 3.1 and 2 and so on, they should be included in an Amiga. Also on an ARM Amiga, I think you should have the compatibility to run the old. That's part of what defines Amiga, in my opinion. And maybe the 8-bit just to confuse it a bit more, maybe the 8-bit, the ability to run 8-bit Amiga C64 content and so on should also be part of it. And that will be a challenge also from the brand's point of view. How do you brand 8-bit by Amiga? But it's a possibility. How much time do we have left? Just to... so there was a question. Yes, sorry, yes.
Just about the ARM part. I know that there is an AROS fork that is ARM, but probably is not working. Any plans to use the code from AROS?
Well, if you want maximum compatibility, you can tap into the original. We've had some discussions with some developers who are very passionate about AROS. And now there's also new emerging developers who use AI tools very efficiently and are more or less radical. They have different opinions about strict open source, for example. And they've come up with interesting approaches and solutions. So there's not only errors, but with AI, and looking where AI tools are going, what you will be able to do in 1 or 2 years from now, the whole concept of what is your own IP, what you can do, what is important. Is the brand more important than a content that you can dynamically generate? I mean, you will soon be able to tell your computer, please, I want to use an Amiga-like user interface, and applications don't even matter. You just tell the machine how you like to work in an editor, what type of user interface you want, and there won't be apps anymore, who knows? And there won't be an operating system anymore, so maybe we'll just help define that. My question to the AROS developers, and not only, was, would you see, and again we tap into the other question, would you see an open source Amiga OS as competition? Would you embrace it? Would you support it? And you know, it can be polarizing topic, but it makes you think, after all the work we did, yes, no, and depending also on the role you had, did you write some component that would fit in well or not? It's a challenging topic, yes, I like this. And that's also why it's nice to be in a debate like this. Yes, sorry.
Hi, so a lot of work, thank you. We all appreciate work. With every rebrand and every change of ownership or clarification of ownership, there comes a purpose, and that's to control the business. That would be, you know, and that's fair. My question is, with all the previous logos and all the fragmentation that already exists and people using the past logos, how aggressively will you as an entity chase organizations and individuals that use older logos? And will you charge licensing to use your new logo on concrete use games?
Well, you see things from a business perspective. If I was here for a business reason, I would be stupid. Like my wife says, you need to get a real job. So yes, there is, you know, it's you like in the Cathedral and the Bazaar paper about open source. Do you need control? Is anarchy better? Many small Amiga projects also flourished and prospered because of the perceived void in these years. So I think the grassroots should not be hurt. To the contrary, that's why we are all here. I also think that direction and clarity can bring a better synergy and efficiency. About trying to milk the system from just because there was a minor change to the logo, that's not going to make a difference in a single cent anywhere. But about creating a confusing product that claims to be an Amiga without being an Amiga, or being able to run Amiga OS or meeting the expectation of what an Amiga is, maybe, you know, with the work we did also with Hyperion and with Commodore was about clarity, and I think clarity will be part of the mission. Now, whether you bring a possible hostile angle to that, I prefer to talk. I hope I answered the question so far, but if I didn't, please let me know. Yes, sir.
Besides the open source blockchain thing, which is conceptually separate, there is a long-standing amount of people that have developed Amiga software and have the knowledge of development. Now that it's more clear for you about who owns what and all that historical things, would you be open for people to be able to contribute some code or some extra features to the official code base so that it can be used by everyone when they update of the software?
Yes, so we are, yes, thank you for the question. The answer is yes. When you release a product to the masses, it needs to have some quality standards which are a bit higher than the daily builds you can do with AI tools. We think one of the problems that led to issues over the past years was a lack of proper agreements between the developers who contributed and the entity like Amiga who was going to distribute it, contracts expiring and things like that. So whether we are going to choose like a CLA, a contributor license agreement, or a copyright assignment, like for example the GNU does, remains to be seen, but it should be one of the other, because otherwise, if you change your mind after you decided, you could have kept it for your own project, but you decided that you wanted to contribute it into Amiga OS, and we embracing this energy also of developers who did the work and wanted to do this work for free. We are also saying, okay, then we don't want money for the upgrades. No? And if we make all these choices together, is it not disruptive if you change your mind? Okay, with the same AI tools we discussed earlier, it's easy to replace something now, but we want stability and quality as the primary goal. The answer is yes. If it's brainstorming about visions and so on, we will do, I think, more developer meetings. We have one in the next few weeks with some developers. So developers having an opportunity to meet also is also another thing, not just online, but also in real life. And yes, so the answer is generally yes, there are some ideas, and yeah. Thank you. Yes?
I know you can't speak for Hyperion, but you mentioned other CPUs other than 68K. Is the door open to it being ported to other PPC systems?
So yeah, I wish that Timothy was here today, because he also deserves to be here. But there will be opportunities where we also speak together, so we also don't have always the same presentation, and a joint one would be nice. So Hyperion may do any CPU at once other than the 68K. And Amiga can do any Amiga OS version at once and license also to third parties, OEMs and so on, but only for the 68K. This is the current situation. At least it brings clarity under what Amiga always used to be able to do, also with its partners. Cloanto, by the way, is now just a licensee, as it used to be in '97 for Amiga Forever. And it never wanted to be this torchbearer for many years. It had to be, it was trapped into this situation because of the ongoing litigation, but it went out as soon as the settlement was reached. So does that answer your question about CPUs? I think and the next step would be to sit down together and continue the conversation with all the parties. Who owns the kernel? Who owns the code that is in addition to OS3? And
Just a follow-up. Where does Wolf OS come into this?
That's a good topic. It was sad. Yes, there's Morph OS, Aeros, and Amiga OS. And potentially now with these new tools, there could be more. I just have to tell the machine, please create something with the same APIs. It won't be clean room because the machine has been exposed to, contaminated a bit with commercial and non-commercial projects. But yes, I look forward to the next meeting with Ralph and the other people at the Morphos team. Yes. So, but a healthy competition is not bad. But yeah, they did a great job staying largely clear of legal issues, and I greatly respect that. And we, sorry.
So
Thank you.
following up on the CPU question, when you say 68K, does that include like the Apollo Vampire, Virtual 68,000?
Any virtual emulated FPGA is covered by Amiga.
And does it, in theory, could you go, well, I've made a 68K that has got, that is backward compatible, but actually it's got a completely different instruction set that you can also...
If it's a 6800, for example, it's covered by Amiga. So Amiga can do anything, also on the evolution of 68K. Yes, emulated, re-implemented, whatever you may call it, it's Amiga. Amiga can do this, yes.
This probably brings us to essentially the last question.
Yeah? Okay.
I was going to ask one question, but really in terms of the 68. You say that you got OS 3.x that's restricted to the 68,000 lines. So does that include the modern 68,000 real applications that are considered faster when new features be brought to the OS to take advantage of those fast emulated CPU?
Well, the 68K per cycle is very efficient. So I think there's a lot of things you could do with a modern 68K running, whether it's FPGA or even ASIC new. I don't think this is necessarily bad to be restricted to that. It means focus and compatibility. And what was your question beyond that? Whether
It's just, obviously when we talk about this, we're a lot of thinking about the retro side of it, not running old software, but to bring it forward for new features within the OS.
we are in talks about new features, new instructions for the 68K, if that is what you have in mind for improvements. But again, it opens the need for alignment across the partners, no? So if you have like Vampire having something specific to them and Amiga OS officially using it, is it something that should be open to others or not? It's an interesting topic, but I admire the efficiency of the 68K even by today's standards, and then you can see it also in emulation and re-implementation. Sorry, there was two hands up at the same time. If the last question on the back, if I think one of you had the last questions, yes. Yes. No, it's Amiga. So actually, it opens the interesting topic of how to name them, because you mentioned 3.4. It's still strange that it's a lower number than 3.5 or 3.9. Now, to speak very transparently and frankly, we have some ideas. It could be 3.10, but it could also be a year version number, like 3.26 or 3.27, like Ubuntu and macOS have been doing. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we are forced to release a new version every year, but it's a way of versioning that will work for the next 75 years. This is Amiga, not Hyperion. Yes. Yes. Is it? Like Hyperion can use that until the end of next year. And they are giving to Amiga everything except some backported code from OS4. And we will need to sit at a table and decide what to do with that. It's not a strict no, because everything can be negotiated. I don't think anyone wants the death of Amiga OS 3.3 features just because of this agreement. I found the end of June version more elegant because it was clear in that. But if it's not possible and if it was necessary to sign this, I think it was better than nothing. But we'll work on this. Yeah.
It sounds like things will continue to progress, and there are even more announcements, I'm sure, very soon.
Yeah,
in the next few
exactly. So
If we could thank both of our presenters today.